It's December 30th, 1916, and several members of the Russian elite are trying to kill Rasputin, an advisor to the Russian royal family. They poisoned him, shot him, and beat him, but he is somehow still alive. One of his attempted killers recalled, "He must have been raised from the dead by the powers of evil. There was something appalling and monstrous in his diabolical refusal to die." This is the amazing story of Grigori Rasputin, the man who couldn't die. Early life. Historians have struggled to document the life of Rasputin. There are so many myths and legends surrounding him that it's difficult to separate fact from fiction. While studying Rasputin, the historian Douglas Smith famously said, "To separate Rasputin from his mythology, I came to realize was to completely misunderstand him. There is no Rasputin without the stories about Rasputin." So, although some of the bizarre stories about him may be untrue, they really impacted how people responded to him, and even how he behaved himself. But even if you distill Rasputin down to the undisputed facts, his life story remains incredible. He grew from a lowly peasant into one of the most powerful people in the Russian Empire. Here is how it happened. Rasputin's real name is Grigori Yefimovich Novik, and he grew up in Serbia in Russia. He attended school, but remained semi-illiterate. His diary contains multiple errors, including the misspelling of the word diary. It's alleged that after his adolescence, he earned a reputation for being a bit on the wild side. He would get very drunk, seduce women, steal, and get violent. This is where people believed he earned the name Rasputin, which means loose one. However, it also translates as where two rivers meet, which describes the town where Rasputin was from, so his name is perhaps a lot more innocent than many perceive. By age 18, Rasputin joined a Christian monastery. During this time, there was the Klist sect of Orthodox Christianity, which was ironically incredibly unorthodox in its teaching. Contrary to most Christian sects, they believed that you become closer to God by committing acts of lust and debauchery. Essentially, you need to get all of your negative urges out of your system, and then you can become a truly holy person. And the best way to do this was to commit large amounts of lust and debauchery until the temptations go away. He married Praskovya Fyodorovna Dubrovina when he was 19, and they had 4 children. For most people, a wife and 4 children would cause you to settle down, but Rasputin did the opposite. 10 years later, at 28, he decided to abandon his wife and children and go on a pilgrimage. He went on a long journey through Greece and Jerusalem. It was not uncommon for men to go on spiritual pilgrimages where they traveled from village to village. He soon gained a reputation as a healer, and local peasants would pay him to cure their illnesses and predict their futures. The British critic Gerald Hamilton actually witnessed Rasputin's healing powers and told the BBC Rasputin had the gift of curing, which was undoubtedly genuine. "I saw an epileptic brought in front of him. By touching the epileptic, this huge peasant seemed to give out something from himself. When the epileptic was cured, Rasputin fell down exhausted in the chair, and it seems as if all of the life and energy had gone out of him." Over time, Rasputin ended up in St. Petersburg. During the Russian Empire, St. Petersburg was very much the capital of Russia, as opposed to Moscow today. It was here that Rasputin would make some powerful friends. There were many people from the Klisti sect of Christianity in this city. and they were excited to meet him. He met Hermogen, the Bishop of Saratov, and Theophan, an inspector for the Religious Academy of St. Petersburg. They were fascinated by mysticism and the occult, so Rasputin was warmly welcomed. In 1906, he was introduced to the Romanovs, who were the Russian royal family. He made an incredibly favorable impression among them, and soon became part of their inner circle. In 1906, Tsar Nicholas wrote to one of his ministers, "A few days ago, I received a peasant from the Tobolsk district, Grigori Rasputin, who brought me an icon of St. Simon Verkhotery. He made a remarkably strong impression, both on Her Majesty and on myself, so that instead of 5 minutes, our conversation went on for more than an hour." 3 years later, Rasputin would form an unbreakable bond with the Russian royal family. Alexei, the son of Nicholas and Alexandra, was a hemophiliac and was now suffering from internal bleeding. He was at death's door. They contacted Rasputin, and he cabled a reply. "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve. The little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much." Thankfully, Alexei recovered, and the Romanovs believed that this was due to Rasputin's healing powers. Historians today contend that the doctors would have prescribed aspirin, which would only have made things worse. Douglas Smith also argues that Rasputin's calming presence to both Alexei and his family allowed him to heal too. Smith writes, "Rasputin's assurances calmed the anxious, fretful mother and filled her with unshakable confidence, and she, in turn, transferred this confidence to her ailing son, literally willing him back to health." But as far as the royal family were concerned, Rasputin had saved their son's life, and his status among the Russian elite grew even further. Rasputin had positioned himself as a man of the people and a humble, holy man. But behind the scenes, Rasputin was apparently going back to his licentious and womanizing ways. When this behavior was finally reported to Nicholas, he refused to believe it and was convinced that he was a humble, holy man. Because he believed Rasputin's accusers were making up these accusations, they were removed from their positions and transported to remote areas. But Rasputin's scandalous behavior continued. The Prime Minister, P.A. Stolypin, sent a letter to the Tsar about Rasputin's recent actions. This split the royal family. The Tsar expelled Rasputin, but Alexandra had him restored within a few months. Nicholas then chose to ignore further actions of wrongdoing. Rasputin did not have a great reputation, and this created many enemies for him. On the 29th of June, 1914, Rasputin was visiting his family back in Serbia. He had just received a telegram and left his home. Suddenly, a woman approached him and drove a knife into his stomach. She then shouted, "I have killed the Antichrist." But she hadn't, and Rasputin was still alive. So she chased him, and Rasputin eventually hit her in the face and knocked her over. She was then arrested. Several weeks later, Rasputin had recovered. Then in 1915, World War I was in full swing. Rasputin was believed to be the puppet master of the Russian elite. However, his pleas to Nicholas to not get involved in World War I fell on deaf ears. Nicholas II decided to focus solely on the military and let Alexandra run domestic affairs. This was when Rasputin became Alexandra's principal advisor, and rumors started circulating. Rasputin, a notorious womanizer, was enjoying an incredibly close friendship with Alexandra. Many have put two and two together, but this is not supported by historical evidence. Rasputin's power was now enormous. He was now in charge of selecting church officials and cabinet ministers, as well as advising on military affairs. Rasputin had no real political ideology other than to keep the Romanovs in power. He often chose incompetent cabinet ministers and made military decisions to the detriment of Russia. But his ties to the royal family meant that he was indestructible. But there were a number of people who wanted him killed and would do whatever it took to remove him. Rasputin was not oblivious to his enemies and was actually incredibly concerned about his safety. Louisette Andrews, a British woman who worked for a rich Russian merchant, recalls how paranoid he was when meeting him. She told the BBC, "He knew somebody was trying to kill him. If you invited him to your place for dinner, you would have to come fetch him with your car and your chauffeur. He wouldn't move until the valet or the footman came to pick him up. He had to have that protection." Andrews famously recalls him saying, "The day they get rid of me, you can be quite sure that Russia will suffer for it, and she will go down." Rasputin's enemies came from several camps. There were the aristocrats who were jealous of how close Rasputin was with the royal family. There were also liberals and reformers who wanted Russia to change, whereas Rasputin was all about giving the royal family absolute power. And of course, there were also people who believed he was the Antichrist too. The legend that Rasputin was indestructible started to come to fruition. Several attempts were made on his life, but were unsuccessful. With all of these attempts unsuccessful, a conspiracy was started instead. This was initiated by the Tsar's cousin, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, a member of the Duman named Vladimir Mitrofanovich Purishkevich, and Prince Felix Yusupov, husband of the Tsar's niece. As the legend goes, Rasputin was invited to Yusupov's home. Rasputin was offered some cakes, but inside them contained poison. According to Yusupov's memoirs, he was brought down to the cellar and given these treats. They then played Yankee Doodle Dandy on the gramophone upstairs to give him the impression that a party was already happening upstairs. But Rasputin ate the cakes, and nothing happened. They had to think on their feet and offered him wine from a cyanide-laced wine glass. Rasputin drank the wine, and again, nothing happened. Rasputin even had a second glass. Soon, the effects of the cyanide showed some signs of their effect. They asked him if he was okay, and he said, "Yes, my head is heavy, and I've a burning sensation in my stomach." So they gave Rasputin another glass of cyanide-laced wine, which they lied that it would help him. But their lie turned out to be the truth. He had recovered. Once this happened, they abandoned the niceties. Yusupov simply took out his gun and shot him. He shot him straight in the heart, which should have resulted in certain death. Rasputin was hit, but managed to run away in the courtyard. Then Purishkevich followed him out and shot him again. 4 shots were pumped at Rasputin's body, but they didn't stop there. Then they threw him in the icy waters of the Neva River, where he finally drowned. When you're trying to kill Rasputin, you need to rule out any possibility of him recovering. There are a number of theories of why it took so much to kill Rasputin. One theory is that the poisoners were just very bad at poisoning people. They didn't use cyanide that was toxic enough, or didn't use enough of it by the body. Also, their choice of putting cyanide in sugary treats was ill-judged, as sugar often binds with cyanide and sometimes prevents it from being absorbed by the body. Another theory is that Rasputin had trained his body to fight poisoning. A ruler in ancient Greece named Mithridates famously ingested a sublethal amount of every poison known to man so he could build up an immunity to it. However, cyanide is a poisonous material that you cannot build up immunity to. A more plausible theory is that Rasputin suffered from alcoholic gastritis. This would mean that he would have very little stomach acid. Cyanide is a lot more toxic when it converts with acid in the stomach. From what we know about Rasputin's lifestyle, he could very likely have had this condition, but this was not proven. The fourth and final theory is that Yusupov made the whole thing up. Yusupov wanted people to read his memoirs, and the inclusion of an unkillable monk in the story may have drawn more attention. It certainly made for an exciting story. According to The Guardian, what is known is that one evening Rasputin went to the Yusupov Palace in St. Petersburg at the invitation of Prince Felix Yusupov. Rasputin's dead body was recovered from the frozen Neva River days later. No one is completely sure what happened in between these two events. Since his death, his legend has grown. The myths and legends surrounding him appear to be both fact and fiction, and it is often not easy to distinguish between the two. One of the key figures in dispelling myths about Rasputin has been the Russian writer Vladimir Osipov. He has argued that Rasputin was not a womanizer at all, and this was mere propaganda from his opponents who wanted to paint him as a sleazy hypocrite. They are perpetrated by historians who don't have any other sources apart from the falsifications that were published at the time by the anti-monarchists trying to bring down the Romanovs. Once communist Russia took over, they had no reason to deny these rumors, as it paints the monarchic system in a negative light. The Russian playwright and personality Eduard Radzinsky has also severely challenged the perception of Rasputin. Firstly, he argued that he was not a monk or a priest, but rather a self-ordained holy man. He also described Nicholas and Alexandra as criminally stupid, so Rasputin's ability to con them wasn't as impressive as it seemed. Douglas Smith believes that Alexandra severely doubted her husband's abilities to run the empire, so needed to keep Rasputin as an advisor. As for womanizing, the idea of a lowly peasant seducing aristocratic ladies of the Russian Empire is something that blurs between fact and fiction. Radzinsky believes that most of his lovers were prostitutes, and oftentimes it would occur through blackmailing or promising them better careers or status. Radzinsky paints him as less of a Casanova and more of an abusive figure like Harvey Weinstein. Douglas Smith points out one strange statistic about his womanizing. The numerous accounts of flings and affairs were overwhelming, but there are no claims of illegitimate children whatsoever. It is highly likely that Rasputin was a womanizer, but this behavior was highly exaggerated. The theories and rumors about Rasputin do not even end there. He did not want to go to war with Germany, so it is even believed that he may have even been a German spy. There's also the theory that Rasputin was actually killed by a British spy named Oswald Rayner, who was romantically involved with Nicholas's niece, and in St. Petersburg on the night of the murder. Once you try to answer one question about Rasputin, several other questions and theories pop out instead. Rasputin died in 1916, and the Romanov dynasty ended a year later. Rasputin's prophecy that the day they get rid of me, Russia will suffer for it, is one that certainly came true. And that brings us to the end of our video. If you enjoyed watching, make sure to give it a like and subscribe. If there are any historical figures that you would like us to cover in future videos, let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.